Welcome back to the channel. My name is Thomas Fletcher and I'm the host of the LCSW network. If you're new to this channel, please do me a favor by smashing that like button, by subscribing to the channel, and by sharing this video with your social work colleagues and friends. The purpose of this channel is to create a community of hope and support where social workers can come together for relevant news, information, and inspiration. Okay, let's get to today's topic. So today I will be reporting a story from NASW. The name of the story is A Perfect Storm. Struggle for Racial Equity Intensifies Amid Health and Economic Crises. Black Lives Matter's protests have inspired millions to take to the streets across the country and across the world. 500,000 people turned out in nearly 500 places across the United States on June the 6th, the New York Times stated in a July 3rd article, pointing out it was a single day in more than a month of protests that still continue today. More than 400 years after enslaved Africans were brought to the U.S., racism in its many forms still exists. Black Americans demand justice and equality, this time as cell phone videos show them being killed by police on American streets, and George Floyd's phrase, "I can't breathe," resonates across the nation. African Americans are not the only people of color who suffer from racial injustice in the U.S. Hispanics seeking refuge are turned away or separated from family members and locked in cages. Native Americans protest as sacred lands are taken so big business can drill for their own profit. Add to that the global health pandemic, which to date has killed more than 200,000 Americans and affects marginalized populations the most. Social workers who have worked for equality and justice for generations are involved in all of these areas. On the heels of responding to COVID-19, the profession is renewing efforts to combat racial inequality at all levels. NASW and its chapters have pledged to end systemic racism within the profession and to work with other institutions such as law enforcement to do the same. This has indeed been a perfect storm of how unintended long-term national social justice ills, overall systemic racism, and systemic racism specific to law enforcement encounters with Black and brown people can merge with a worldwide public health crisis in the form of COVID-19 pandemic, said Melvin Wilson, NASW Senior Policy Consultant for Social Justice and Human Rights. The result is national turmoil. It's sad, he said, that systemic racism is reflected in the fact the pandemic disproportionately impacts people of color through higher coronavirus infections and death rates. These health disparities will be further exacerbated by an economic crisis to populations already struggling, Wilson said. The blatant racism of national leadership and politics are contributing to the blatant racism we see today, said Iris Carlton-Lanay, PhD, who recently retired as the Berg Beach Distinguished Professor of Community Social Work at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. The fact that officers have to wear body cameras and people have their cell phones at the ready is a consequence of national leadership that's determined to be divisive, and that is working. Carlton-Lanay, who received the NASW Lifetime Achievement Award earlier this year, said racism is hard to eliminate and cannot be addressed with a one-time Band-Aid. It is not an event, it is a practice. White fragility is part of it, she said, as is the fact racism is structural. It's built into the system. It's so systemic people don't notice it's happening. It's normal in America, and defensiveness is the first reaction when you call attention to it, she said. That means you might not be willing to hear anything that might make you uncomfortable. And that's part of the problem, Carlton Linné said. There is a lack of willingness to sit with discomfort, sit long enough to deal with the problem. It's not much of an ask to look at the problem. Social work schools need to address racism in all content, she said. In every policy we talk about, we must talk about how it will affect Black and brown people. That goes with everything we teach in social work. When we teach it that way, we produce practitioners who practice that way. We produce the quality of practitioner who understands what is seen in agencies and organizations and can strategize on how to fix it. One challenge, even in social work schools, is there is a resistance from both faculty and students. There is white fragility, and there is the determination that it is not a problem, she said. We have to determine that it is a problem. Another challenge, she believes, is that institutions and most organizations and individuals are resistant to change. Addressing racism head-on can help, which means including the topic in all content and talking about how every policy will affect people of color. We have to make the case that this is a public health crisis, and this is how it affects the people who live in this community. Carlton Linné said, we need to make our voices heard, and we have to be willing to work at it, and it is exhausting. Social workers cannot bring about change alone, Wilson said, but must work with other national and state organizations to help save the country. The role social work played during the civil rights movement is an example, he said. As an association and as a profession, we joined with diverse groups to pass some of the most significant civil rights and anti-racism laws in America's history. The American Academy of Social Work and Social Welfare on June 26 announced a new addition to its grand challenges for social work, stating, "We are in a moment when the nation and the world's attention is focused on racial injustice and ending systemic violence and oppression against Black people. The grand challenge to eliminate racism is headed by co-leaders Martell Teasley and Michael S. Spencer. Teasley, LPN, MSW, PhD, is a professor and dean of the University of Utah College of Social Work in Salt Lake City and president of the National Association of Deans and Directors of Schools of Social Work. Spencer, MS, PhD, is a director of Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, and Oceanic Affairs at the Indigenous Wellness Research Institute at the University of Washington in Seattle. Racism has been around a long time, and Teasley believes it ebbs and flows. When the country goes through downturns like the economy, our ills seem to emerge, she said. Social work deals with issues like race, class, status, and gender. And Teasley said to bring change, social workers first should take a more in-depth look at history, then look inward to our own roles and how we see racism, how we see the underlying causes of what people come to see us for, domestic violence, child abuse, the deeper ills we see in society, and the cause of racism. A lot of cynicism revolves around race, as do excuses why it cannot be tackled, he said. We can and do need to collaborate with people in other professions. We haven't stopped our lives for COVID-19. We must do the same thing with racism. Racism, according to the American Public Health Association, is a public health crisis. The Pew's Trusts call it the same, naming 24 state and local governments that either have passed or are considering that designation. That's a good start, Teasley said. I do think it is a public health crisis, and it's good that society is starting to say that. It's a public health issue because racism impacts people in the public domain. We should also challenge microaggression because it can cause stress and physical damage. Frustration can turn into violence, he said. America came into being not by we shall overcome, but by we shall conquer. Environmental racism carries impacts too, he added. We haven't begun to address that. The National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine declared schools as a social determinant of health, which impacts what students do throughout their lives, Teasley said. And he believes social work schools need more racism coverage in their curriculums, and the same is true for K-12. We're not giving the whole picture in history, he said. Students learn George Washington chopped that cherry tree, but they don't know he had slaves. It took several years of dogged insistence for racism to become a standalone grand challenge, he said. Original thought was it was embedded within the other challenges, but there were few mentions of it. The issue of race is a problem that needs particular attention. Teasley and Spencer decided about 9 months ago to write a book on the grand challenge to eliminate racism, with leaders of each of the original 12 grand challenges invited to contribute. When it's finished, we'll have a format when we talk to people to develop plans for advancing the challenge, Teasley said. They are looking for evidence-based, innovative approaches to taking on the racism challenge. The book is expected to be out later this year or in the first quarter of 2021. The Latino Social Work Organization focuses on events that train others to work with the Latino population, said Noe Torres, MSW, LCSW, Master of Divinity and Master in Education, a school social worker in Chicago. Trainings include the organization's La Familia perspective, which can complement and enhance social work practice when integrated in practice with Latinos, their website states. We facilitate use of our model as partners, he said. They run the events and we provide a framework to enrich the learning opportunity for people who work with Latinx community. The model uses the NASW Code of Ethics and the CSWE core competencies, and it includes the group's La Familia perspective. Developed over time, he said, La Familia incorporates background information on the family involved, including not only their original home, but where they live in the U.S. The rich history of homelands is vital for practitioners because the vast locational differences shape beliefs and traditions. Also, framing an approach to integration and solidarity play out differently depending on the number of generations who have been here, and needs are different, Torres said. It's a rich dynamic. Useful tools can include storytelling, using traditional healers, being more inclusive of different perspectives, and working with communities of faith. Also essential are the social work skills of understanding the trauma-informed perspectives, meeting people where they're at, and seeing the whole individual, Torres said. This is a micro, meso, macro perspective. Racism evolves with the times and changes forms, said Spencer. Racism is a dynamic that doesn't stay the same. A lot of times throughout history, people have attacked the most vulnerable in their communities. In our time, it's immigrant communities, people who have come here because of risk endangering them in their own country. America has been destabilized because of COVID-19, and it has compounded other issues, Spencer said. George Floyd came on the heels of a lot of incidences, including race and the economy. All of that just came together. In Seattle, he sees destabilization of the sense of America combined with all the threats facing us, and more media awareness on everything, leading to people being angrier. They're upset, Spencer said. They're looking at how this country is being run. And for people of color and indigenous communities, this has been our fight. I've been writing about this for 20 years, and I'm standing on the shoulders of others before me. What we have to see is how what's going on will propel us to take action so we can thrive together, he said. The question is, what can social workers do? What many people are asking for is the same thing social workers want and work on, he said. Native peoples have seen genocide, ethnocide, and displacement from their lands, said Spencer, who is Native Hawaiian. And still we exist and identify and stand strong. And that is a threat. Hawaii currently provides a good example of a clash between Native peoples and non-natives in moves to build windmills for power production, Spencer said. They're huge. They're not quiet. They harm the native environment. And where do they want to put them? In native land in people's backyards, he said. These are sacred lands, and we have a relationship with the land. That has been the history of an imperial colonial society, man over the environment. This time, the plan might be stopped because the land is the home of a native endangered bat, as well as a native owl that is indigenous and endangered. Native peoples see those in power as believing indigenous peoples do not matter and hope they will disappear, Spencer said. Until that changes, we're going to lose more. A lot of work is taking place in Seattle school districts and with school personnel on race and inequality in education and where that comes from, Spencer said. The movement is being driven by young people and black women. Those are the leaders I see emerging. It's changing policies. It's changing attitudes, he said. It took a pandemic and it took George Floyd for it to happen. So this is an article that I just received today from the NASW called Perfect Storm. It's written by Alison Laurie, and I will leave a link for it in the description below. Please leave me your comments, leave me your thoughts. Again, we are creating a community of hope and support where social workers can come for relevant news, information, and inspiration. I want to thank all the social workers out there. Thank you for everything that you do for your clients, for your agency, and for the profession. Again, please continue to support each other and yourselves. Bye for now.